Everyone stared at the notice pinned to the front door, the paper trembling slightly in the morning breeze. $4,000 per month. For what exactly? A stretch of asphalt, a row of neatly trimmed hedges, a promise that felt more like a threat. Maria felt her hands go cold as she reread the words. How could this be real? How could a place she had called home for 15 years suddenly feel like a trap? Her neighbors were gathered outside, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and simmering anger. Mr. Jensen, the retired teacher with the permanent crease between his brows, shook his head slowly. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered, though no one really believed him. And yet the HOA's email sent late last night left no room for negotiation. Late fees, penalties, liens, they had thought they were part of a community safe behind their gates, but now the gates seemed more like walls. Maria's mind raced as she walked through the quiet streets of her neighborhood. Every perfectly mowed lawn, every identical mailbox felt suddenly oppressive. This wasn't just a financial blow, it was personal. It was as if someone had decided her home, her memories, her hard work were up for auction to the highest bidder. She thought about her children, playing in the backyard just yesterday, laughing under the sun. Would they understand why Mommy looked so worried? Could they even understand that the rules had changed overnight, without warning? At the small corner cafe, the chatter was different. The usual morning greetings were replaced by whispers of outrage. "They can't do this," one resident said, slamming her coffee cup down with more force than necessary. "We've paid our dues for years. This isn't right." Maria listened quietly, noting how quickly fear turned into anger, how quickly a community could fracture under pressure. Later, she returned home, packing her living room, the notice still clutched in her hands. She imagined a team of suited men sitting in an office, laughing as they typed up numbers that would crush ordinary people. Her chest tightened with helpless fury. She remembered the first day she moved here, the excitement of painting walls, planting flowers, choosing furniture for her children's rooms. Now that joy felt tainted, overshadowed by greed and bureaucracy. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Maria felt a spark of something else, something quiet but insistent. Not defeat, not despair, determination. She couldn't fight them alone, but maybe, just maybe, the neighbors would stand together. Maybe the community she had trusted, the same community now trembling with fear, could find courage. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. The numbers danced in her mind. 4,000, 4,000, 4,000. It was more than a sum, it was a symbol of power, of control, of the kind of world where a single decision could turn a lifetime of hard work into uncertainty. She thought of the elderly couple next door, the single mom across the street, the kids who had grown up alongside hers, and she knew she couldn't let them down. The first step, she realized, was awareness. They had to understand what was happening before panic set in completely. She printed copies of the notice, gathering her courage. Tomorrow, she would knock on doors. She would speak. She would remind everyone that they weren't just numbers on a ledger. They were human beings with homes, histories, and voices that deserved to be heard. As the moon rose high above the quiet neighborhood, Maria felt a mixture of fear and resolve, the two entwined like the shadows on her walls. She had no idea how this battle would unfold, no clue what obstacles awaited. But she knew one thing, she wasn't going to back down. Not tonight. Not ever. And somewhere deep inside, a small but insistent hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, justice could be reclaimed from the grip of greed. Why did the HOA feel so untouchable? Maria couldn't stop asking herself that as she walked down the familiar streets the next morning, flyers in hand, knocking on doors with a pounding heart. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, but the fear in her neighbor's eyes made the morning feel heavy. Mrs. Alvarez opened her door slowly, gripping her worn apron as if it could shield her from the storm that had landed on their doorstep. "It's true," she whispered, her voice trembling. 4,000 a month." Maria nodded, forcing calm into her tone, though inside she was trembling too. "We're going to figure this out. We're going to fight it together." Mrs. Alvarez's eyes flickered between doubt and hope, her lips pressing into a thin line. That small flicker told Maria that the battle had begun, not just against the HOA, but against the creeping paralysis that fear brought with it. Across the street, the Martins had gathered with their teenage daughter, faces drawn and tired. They had just returned from work, and the notice had hit them like a physical blow. Their daughter's small hand clutched her mother's skirt as she asked quietly, "Mom, are we going to lose our house?" Maria didn't know how to answer. How could she promise safety when everything about the situation screamed uncertainty? She could only offer her presence, her determination, and a promise that they wouldn't face this alone. Word spread quickly. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered outside the community center, clutching letters, notices, and a growing sense of shared outrage. The air was thick with tension. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs into discussions, discussions into arguments. "We can't let them do this," someone shouted. "We've built our lives here." Maria felt her own pulse quicken as she realized the power that came from people uniting. Fear could paralyze, but collective anger, when channeled, could become something unstoppable. The HOA office loomed at the end of the street like a fortress, windows reflecting the harsh sunlight, officers moving with a confidence born of bureaucracy. Residents peered through hedges, trying to catch a glimpse of the people making decisions that seemed so cruel. Every glance, every door opening and closing, felt like a battle won or lost before it even began. Maria's stomach twisted as she imagined the cold calculation happening inside, the way numbers and rules could override human lives without a second thought. Then came the first meeting. A crowd of 30, 40, 50 neighbors crammed into the tiny HOA boardroom, the smell of coffee and tension mixing in the air. Maria stood near the front, gripping her notes, her heart hammering. The board members entered, crisp suits and polished shoes, faces set in expressions of polite detachment. They didn't know what they were stepping into. They had no idea that a community, long subdued by rules and fees, was about to rise. The room erupted almost immediately. Voices overlapped. Questions, accusations, pleas. "This is extortion," Mr. Jensen shouted. "You can't just demand this much." Maria's voice rose as well, firm but measured. "We've paid faithfully, we've followed the rules, and now suddenly we are expected to pay $4,000 a month. How is this fair?" The board members shuffled papers, their faces tight, unprepared for the flood of human emotion confronting them. It wasn't just about the money. Maria realized that now. It was about dignity, about control, about the basic right to be heard. Neighbors shared stories of long nights, of small victories and sacrifices made to create homes that were safe and welcoming. Tears were shed, fists were pounded. Silent nods of agreement passed between strangers who suddenly felt more like allies than neighbors. Each voice strengthened the next, a ripple growing into a wave. Yet even in that moment of unity, Maria felt the weight of uncertainty. What legal avenues did they have? Could they fight an organization armed with lawyers and regulations? The fear of the unknown lingered, gnawing at the edges of their resolve. Still, standing there, hearing her neighbors speak, seeing their shared pain, Maria knew something critical. Fear could be countered with courage, but only if it was shared. The meeting ended without resolution, but something had shifted. A plan had begun to take shape. Committees formed, research was assigned, and strategies whispered among residents as they left the room. It was messy, chaotic, human, but it was alive. Maria walked home that evening, exhausted but exhilarated. Her children ran to greet her, unaware of the storm outside, and she hugged them tightly, feeling the fragile normalcy of family life in the eye of a growing battle. That night, as she spread documents across the kitchen table, Maria realized the fight was just beginning. The HOA had underestimated them. They had assumed compliance, silence, resignation. But these were not just tenants, they were a community, and communities had a way of defending what was theirs. There would be obstacles, no doubt. Legal letters, threats, delays designed to break spirits. But Maria's resolve, mirrored in the eyes of neighbors who had dared to speak up, could not be crushed. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the quiet lawns. Somewhere, a dog barked, a reminder of ordinary life continuing despite extraordinary stress. Maria looked out the window, breathing deeply. The fight ahead would be grueling, exhausting, and uncertain, but it would also reveal something remarkable. Courage, unity, the sheer stubbornness of human dignity. And in that revelation, she found hope. A fragile, flickering hope, but hope nonetheless. Tomorrow would bring letters, phone calls, meetings with lawyers, and perhaps more confrontations with the board. But tonight, Maria allowed herself a small, private victory. They had begun to reclaim their voices. And sometimes, she thought, reclaiming your voice is the first step to reclaiming your home. Why did the letters never feel like enough? Maria stared at the stack on her kitchen counter, each one a carefully worded attempt to reason with the HOA, each one likely ignored before it was even opened. The weight of bureaucracy pressed down on her chest, heavy and unrelenting. And yet she refused to let it crush her spirit. She had seen the fear in her neighbors' eyes, the uncertainty that tightened their jaws and stole their sleep. She couldn't let silence win. The following morning, Maria found herself at the edge of the community park, where the neighborhood kids usually ran and laughed. Today, the playground echoed only with the quiet rustle of leaves. Parents hovered nearby, their conversations low, urgent. Everyone had heard that the HOA had hired extra security, just to patrol, they said, but it felt more like intimidation. Every shadow seemed to carry the weight of power they didn't deserve, every glance from the uniformed guards a reminder. They were being watched, measured, judged. Maria's phone buzzed constantly. Calls from concerned neighbors, anxious voices asking what steps to take, how to respond. She tried to answer calmly, offering plans and advice, but inside she felt a knot tightening around her heart. Could she truly protect them? Could she protect her home? She thought of her children, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm raging just outside their doors. That innocence, fragile and precious, fueled her determination. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. A van marked with the HOA logo pulled up in front of the neighborhood clubhouse. Two representatives stepped out, folders in hand, eyes scanning the gathering crowd. Maria felt her pulse spike. The room had grown tense with anticipation. Whispers turned to murmurs. Questions flew. Why are they here? What do they want? And then the doors opened. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Chairs scraped against the floor as residents took seats, voices low but urgent. The HOA representatives spoke first, their tone polished, practiced. "We understand your concerns," one began, glancing at the papers in his hands, "but the fees are non-negotiable. Compliance is mandatory." Maria felt a surge of frustration, a wave of disbelief crash through her. Non-negotiable, mandatory. Was this a statement of law or a challenge meant to provoke fear? Voices erupted almost immediately. Mr. Jensen, his face flushed with anger, spoke first. "You don't understand. These fees are crushing families. You can't just impose them overnight and expect us to comply." Maria watched as neighbors leaned forward, voices overlapping, stories spilling out. Months of unpaid bills, medical emergencies, layoffs, sacrifices made to maintain homes. The HOA representatives remained calm, almost too calm, as if the human emotion in the room didn't touch them. Then came the subtle threats. Non-compliance will result in liens. Legal action will follow. A murmur ran through the crowd. Maria's stomach churned, but her voice cut through the tension. "We're not just numbers. We are residents, neighbors, families, and we will not be silenced or intimidated by paperwork or suits." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a declaration at once. Outside, the air had grown colder, shadows lengthening as evening approached. But inside, something remarkable was happening. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now standing together, shoulders squared, voices firm. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered with defiance. Maria caught the eye of Mrs. Alvarez, whose trembling hands were now clenched into fists, and she knew the fight was no longer hers alone. As the meeting ended, residents filed out with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The HOA representatives retreated, papers in hand, their calm composure slightly shaken by the collective force of human emotion. For the first time, Maria felt a sense of agency, small but powerful. They had spoken, and in speaking, they had reminded themselves they were not powerless. That night, Maria returned home and sat at her kitchen table, the dim light casting shadows across her face. She began drafting a plan, meetings with legal advisors, gathering documentation of payments, creating a neighborhood coalition. Every detail mattered. Every action mattered. She scribbled, crossed out, rewrote, each word a promise to herself and her neighbors that they would fight and win. Her children peeked around the corner, sensing the tension, sensing the gravity of the moment. Maria pulled them close. "We're okay," she whispered, more to convince herself than them. "We will get through this." Their small hands in hers were grounding, a reminder of what was truly at stake. Every legal document, every confrontation, every sleepless night was about protecting this, the fragile, beautiful life they had built together. Days turned into weeks, and the HOA's tactics escalated. Letters grew sterner, fees were recalculated, warnings of foreclosure began to appear. Maria and the coalition worked tirelessly, holding strategy meetings in living rooms, communicating through calls and texts, organizing petitions and documenting every interaction. Each small victory, like a response from a legal counsel or a neighbor agreeing to join the fight, was celebrated quietly but fiercely. And yet the uncertainty never fully left them. The looming threat of losing their homes, the constant barrage of rules and regulations, pressed down like an invisible weight. But Maria had discovered something profound. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of it. And for the first time, she realized that this battle wasn't just about money. It was about identity, about dignity, about refusing to be erased or controlled by faceless authority. As the sun set on another tense day, Maria stood by her front window, watching the neighborhood she had fought so hard to protect. The lawns glowed faintly in the fading light, the streets quiet once more. She knew the next battle would be harder, fiercer, and perhaps more personal. But standing there, breathing in the crisp evening air, she felt a surge of resolve. They had begun to fight, and that, she realized, was the most dangerous thing to the HOA of all. Why did the threats feel closer now than ever? Maria could hear them in the creak of her front gate, in the distant hum of a black SUV parked across the street, in the cold certainty of the letters piling on her doorstep. Each one carried the same warning: pay or face consequences. But now the stakes weren't just financial, they were deeply personal. Every word felt like an accusation, a challenge, a test of courage she hadn't chosen but could not ignore. At the next neighborhood meeting, the atmosphere was electric, tinged with fatigue and raw fear. The living room of the community center was packed shoulder to shoulder, neighbors exchanging anxious glances, voices low but charged with energy. Mrs. Alvarez gripped the edge of a chair, knuckles white, whispering to Maria, "Do they really think we'll just give up?" Maria shook her head, her eyes scanning the room. "No," she replied softly, but inside a storm of determination and dread raged. The HOA had sent their top enforcer this time, a sharply dressed man named Mr. Whitman, whose presence alone seemed to tighten the air. He spoke with a calm precision that was almost cruel in its detachment. "Compliance is expected immediately. Non-payment will result in liens and legal action. This is not negotiable." His gaze swept the room, measuring, calculating, like he was hunting for cracks in their resolve. Maria felt her chest tighten, a combination of fear and fury pressing down on her. But this time the residents didn't flinch. Voices rose, overlapping but coherent, each one a declaration of defiance. "We have rights," Mr. Jensen shouted. "We've lived here faithfully for decades. You cannot bully us into submission." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Maria stepped forward, her voice steady despite the adrenaline pounding in her veins. "We are not just lines on your spreadsheets. We are families, we are neighbors, and we will fight to protect our homes and our dignity." The tension was almost unbearable. Mr. Whitman's composure faltered ever so slightly, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. He had expected fear, compliance, silence. What he faced instead was unity, raw and unyielding. The meeting stretched on, hours filled with questions, demands for documentation, and statements of principle. Maria listened, absorbing every detail, every concern, knowing that each voice added strength to their cause. After the meeting, the residents lingered in the parking lot, unwilling to leave, unwilling to let the moment of solidarity slip away. They shared stories, fears, and quiet victories. The young mother across the street admitted she had stayed up all night crying, afraid they would lose their home. Mr. Jensen revealed he had drafted letters to local officials, hoping to bring outside attention to their plight. Every shared story became a thread in the fabric of their resistance, weaving together a community that had been fragmented by fear. At home, Maria found herself alone with her thoughts, the quiet punctuated only by the ticking of the clock. She thought about the children, the pets, the laughter and tears that had filled her home for years. How could anyone reduce all of that to a number on a ledger? Her fingers traced the edge of the latest notice, the cold, impersonal print a stark contrast to the warmth and life within her walls. Somewhere deep inside, a fire burned, quiet, persistent, unyielding. Then came the first legal letter. The envelope was thick, stamped with the official seal of the HOA's law firm. Maria's hands trembled as she tore it open. Words like foreclosure, liability, and noncompliance leapt off the page. Her stomach churned. The letter was precise, merciless, and utterly devoid of empathy. She felt a wave of despair, the kind that threatened to crush even the strongest resolve. But she refused to let it, not now, not ever. She called the coalition immediately. Voices buzzed over the phone, anxious but determined. Plans were revised, meetings scheduled with lawyers, documents gathered, signatures collected. Every small action felt like a lifeline, every collaborative effort a shield against the looming threat. Maria realized that fear could be transformed into purpose, uncertainty into strategy. The community was no longer just reacting. They were planning, calculating, and striking back with precision. Night fell and the neighborhood was quiet, the shadows long and heavy. But inside the homes, the battle continued. Maria spread maps, notes, and letters across her dining table, tracing the paths they would take, the arguments they would make, the evidence they would gather. Her children slept peacefully in their beds, oblivious to the storm outside, and she let herself steal a brief moment of hope. They were fighting for more than money. They were fighting for the sanctity of home, for the dignity of human life, for the right to be seen and heard. Then came the whispers. Rumors spread that the HOA was considering an emergency assessment, a new tactic to divide and intimidate the residents. The streets buzzed with anxiety, neighbors sharing what little information they had, trying to piece together the truth from scraps. Maria knew that panic could be more dangerous than the fees themselves. She worked tirelessly to keep people focused, to remind them that fear could be weaponized, but courage, when united, was stronger. One night, as she walked past the row of houses, the wind whipping around her face, Maria noticed the subtle signs of resilience. A note taped to a mailbox encouraging neighbors to attend the next meeting. Lights burning late into the night, families strategizing together. Cars parked outside homes where small gatherings whispered with quiet determination. The neighborhood was alive, buzzing with a collective heartbeat that refused to be silenced. Maria's resolve hardened. The fight was no longer just hers, it was everyone's. Every phone call answered, every door knocked, every legal document filed was a small victory in a much larger war. They had been underestimated. They had been counted out. But together they had discovered something more powerful than fear: unity. And unity, Maria realized, could move mountains, or at the very least, push back against walls built on greed and indifference. As she finally collapsed into bed that night, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in her body, Maria allowed herself one thought. They had survived the first wave. The next would be harder, more personal, more relentless. But they had proven something crucial. Homes weren't just buildings, and families weren't just names on a ledger. They were people. And people, when standing together, could fight even the most unyielding forces. Why did it feel like the walls were closing in? Maria could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, every glance from a neighbor loaded with unspoken worry. The letters had become more frequent, the threats sharper, the insinuations more personal. The HOA had escalated. They weren't just sending notices anymore, they were sending a message. Resistance would be costly, but Maria refused to let fear dictate the terms of her life. The community had gathered again at the small clubhouse, the room buzzing with nervous energy. It was past sundown, the orange glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the parking lot, but the residents had come. Every chair was filled, every corner crowded, each person carrying the weight of uncertainty on their shoulders. The youngest among them fidgeted in seats meant for adults, unaware of the full scope of the battle raging around them, yet absorbing the gravity in ways only children can. Mr. Whitman had returned, sharper, colder, his suit impeccably pressed, a folder clutched tightly to his chest. His presence alone made conversations hush, voices faltering under his gaze. "We've reviewed your objections," he began, his tone smooth, deliberate. "The fees are lawful and non-negotiable. Compliance is mandatory. Any further resistance will result in immediate legal action." His words were meant to crush, to intimidate, but Maria could see the slight tremor in his hand, almost imperceptible, as if the unity of the residents was beginning to penetrate his armor. Voices rose in unison. "You can't just bulldoze us," someone shouted. The room seemed to vibrate with emotion. Fear, anger, and determination collided in the air, palpable and raw. Maria felt her own chest tighten as she stepped forward, heart hammering. "We are not passive. We are not invisible. You cannot threaten our families, our homes, and expect silence in return." Her words echoed, amplified by the collective heartbeat of the room. Every nod, every whispered agreement, every clenched fist was a small victory against the looming threat. Then the first real pushback from the HOA came. Notices of liens were sent to the residents' homes, formal, cold, impersonal documents that carried a weight far heavier than paper could hold. Maria felt her stomach drop as she opened hers, seeing the official seal, the calculated language, the deadlines that seemed impossible. Fear threatened to seep in, but she steeled herself. This was what they had been preparing for, and the coalition was ready. Legal counsel had been contacted, petitions drafted, and neighbors ready to stand side by side. The emotional toll was undeniable. Families stayed up late, reviewing documents, consulting with lawyers, discussing strategies in hushed tones so the children wouldn't hear. Some cried quietly in kitchens, others paced in frustration. Maria herself found it hard to sleep, the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest. But each sleepless night was a testament to their resolve, a quiet declaration that they would not surrender without a fight. The HOA, sensing the growing resistance, upped the ante. Threats of foreclosure, warnings of additional fees, and subtle attempts to isolate vocal residents created tension not just between families and the board, but within the community itself. Friends whispered about whether they should comply, neighbors questioned one another's judgment. Maria felt the strain in every conversation, the fear that a single crack could splinter the fragile unity they had built. Yet she reminded herself and others, doubt was inevitable, but surrender was optional. Then came the first real breakthrough. A local reporter had caught wind of the escalating conflict, intrigued by the David versus Goliath nature of the fight. Calls were made, interviews arranged, and suddenly the HOA's power felt less absolute. The spotlight brought a sense of accountability, a realization that actions in the shadows could now be exposed to public scrutiny. Maria felt a surge of cautious hope. Exposure was a weapon, and it was one they wielded carefully. Even so, the personal cost weighed heavily. Neighbors confided in Maria, sharing stories of sleepless nights, financial strain, and emotional exhaustion. Some feared the battle would consume them entirely. Maria felt a wave of empathy, the shared grief of families standing resilient under unimaginable pressure. And yet, amidst the exhaustion, there was courage, a quiet, enduring force that refused to be extinguished. At home, Maria walked past the bedrooms of her children, listening to their steady breathing, feeling the fragile warmth of normalcy that she had fought to preserve. She reflected on the paradox of their struggle. Life continued, small and beautiful, even as chaos threatened from outside. And in that reflection, she understood a deeper truth. Home was not just walls and roofs, but the life, love, and resilience that filled them. The coalition held strategy meetings deep into the night, planning legal challenges, documenting every HOA action, coordinating neighbor outreach. Every detail mattered, every small victory was celebrated quietly, fiercely. They were learning that resistance required endurance, patience, and relentless attention to detail. It was a war fought in shadows and documents, in whispers and quiet gatherings, but every act was a step toward reclaiming dignity. By the end of the week, the community had forged an unspoken pact. They would not be divided, intimidated, or silenced. Maria's voice became a steadying force, a reminder of why they were fighting. Each conversation, each meeting, each phone call carried the weight of hope, fear, and determination intertwined. They were discovering something powerful, something beyond the immediate struggle. They were discovering the strength of unity, the resilience of people who refused to be erased. As Maria stood at the window that night, watching the neighborhood bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, she felt a surge of cautious pride. The battle was far from over. Threats would escalate, legal maneuvers would continue, and the pressure would intensify. But they had proven something crucial. Fear could be transformed into resolve, isolation into unity, and uncertainty into action. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more confrontation, perhaps more moments that would test their courage to the brink. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, Maria allowed herself a fleeting sense of triumph. They were still standing. They were still united. And that, she realized, was more powerful than any fee, any lien, or any threat the HOA could throw at them. Why did the tension feel like it could snap at any moment? Maria could feel it in every glance, every whispered conversation, every cautious step down the quiet streets of her neighborhood. The HOA had escalated their tactics, sending notices, legal threats, and even hearing outside enforcers to patrol the community. Fear lingered in the air, heavy and sharp, but now, intertwined with it, was determination, an energy that had been quietly building among the residents. The first public confrontation was inevitable. Word had spread that the HOA board would meet with residents at a local town hall to discuss compliance. Maria and the coalition arrived early, gathering in the back of the crowded room, sharing anxious looks and whispered strategies. Families brought notes, letters, documents, and a quiet bravery that felt almost tangible in the air. Each person carried the weight of their own story, their own fear, but together they formed a force that refused to be ignored. As the board members took their seats on the dais, polished and confident, a hush fell over the room. Mr. Whitman's eyes scanned the audience, measuring, calculating, as if trying to intimidate before even speaking. He cleared his throat, his voice smooth, professional, rehearsed. "We are here to address concerns regarding the new assessment fees. Compliance is required. Questions will be answered, but understand this. The fees are non-negotiable." A collective murmur ran through the room. Maria could feel the nervous energy ripple, a mixture of fear and anticipation. But she stepped forward, her heart pounding, and spoke with clarity and strength. "We are not here to beg or negotiate out of fear. We are here because we have rights. We are homeowners, families, and members of this community. We deserve to be heard, and we deserve fairness." The first questions were met with stone-faced responses, dismissive gestures, and pointed references to policies. But Maria noticed something. The room was shifting. Whispers of agreement, nods of support, and steady eyes meeting hers gave her courage. One by one, residents stood, sharing stories of financial strain, personal sacrifices, and the deep emotional toll the fees had taken. Their voices quivered at first, but grew stronger with each testimony. Mrs. Alvarez, her hands trembling, spoke next. "I've lived here for 30 years. I raised my children in this neighborhood. How can you threat to take this from me without even listening to what we've endured?" Tears glistened in her eyes, and a hush fell over the room. Maria's gaze locked on hers, offering silent encouragement. "Keep going, don't stop." Then came the subtle pushback from the board. "We understand your concerns," one member said, voice clipped. "But policies exist for a reason. Fees are mandatory. Noncompliance will result in liens and further legal action." The words were meant to intimidate, but instead they strengthened the resolve in the room. A quiet, unspoken defiance hung in the air. Voices rose in a chorus of challenge. Families spoke of the absurdity of fees doubling or tripling overnight. Residents recounted sleepless nights, financial strain, and the emotional toll of living under constant threat. Maria felt a surge of pride as she witnessed strangers transformed into allies, individuals bound together by a common cause, their collective voice stronger than any legal threat. Outside, tension mounted. Cameras from a local news crew arrived, capturing the unfolding drama. The HOA's veneer of authority began to crack under public scrutiny. The residents realized that the battle was no longer just legal. It was now public, emotional, and symbolic. Every word spoken, every story shared, every tear shed became ammunition against the bureaucracy that had sought to silence them. After hours of testimony and debate, a breakthrough emerged. The board agreed to postpone enforcement actions while a review was conducted, citing procedural concerns. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of hope. Maria felt her shoulders relax slightly, but the weight of responsibility remained. This small victory was fragile, easily reversed, and it reminded her that the battle was far from over. Returning home, Maria found herself walking past the rows of houses, each one a testament to persistence and resilience. Families stood together, sharing stories, strategizing, and quietly celebrating the small victories. Children played in yards, oblivious to the tension that gripped their parents, yet their laughter seemed to bolster the adults, a reminder of what they were fighting for. That night, Maria reviewed the day's events with the coalition, discussing next steps, legal strategies, and community outreach. Every detail mattered. Every conversation, every meeting, every document became part of a larger tapestry of resistance. Exhaustion tugged at her, but she refused to let it cloud her resolve. Sleep would come later. Tonight, vigilance and strategy were paramount. As she finally sat down to rest, Maria reflected on the subtle moral lesson hidden within the chaos. Courage isn't about never feeling fear, it's about stepping forward despite it. Unity isn't simply gathering in one room, it's standing together when the world tries to pull you apart. And resilience isn't the absence of struggle, it's the determination to endure, to rise again, and again, no matter the cost. The neighborhood, though quiet under the dim glow of streetlights, pulsed with newfound energy. The residents had discovered something far greater than money or rules. They had discovered their collective strength, the power of solidarity, and the unyielding spirit that comes from standing up for what is right. Maria, watching from her front porch, allowed herself a moment of quiet hope, knowing that the next confrontation would test them further, but confident that together they could withstand it. Tomorrow would bring new letters, new threats, perhaps new fears. But tonight, they had reminded the world and themselves that homes are more than buildings, and families are more than names on a ledger. They were human, resilient, and determined, and that, Maria realized, was a force no bureaucracy could easily overcome. Why did it feel like the walls were closing in faster than ever? Maria could sense it in the quiet tension that hung over the neighborhood, in the hurried whispers as neighbors exchanged updates, and in the stack of notices piling up on her counter, letters with legal language designed to intimidate, to isolate, to break spirits. Yet amidst the fear, a remarkable transformation had occurred. The residents were no longer just neighbors, they were a united front. The next HOA meeting had been scheduled in the Grand Town Hall, a place far larger than the small clubhouse where their first confrontation had occurred. The board clearly intended to overwhelm them with numbers and authority. Maria arrived early with the coalition, notebooks and folders in hand, her pulse quick but steady. Families trickled in behind her, some tentative, some fiercely determined, each carrying the weight of their own stories. The room buzzed with a nervous energy, the kind that precedes either triumph or collapse. As the board members took their seats on the elevated dais, polished and impassive, Maria felt the familiar tension twist in her stomach. Mr. Whitman was back, his eyes scanning the room with the same calculating precision. "We are here to discuss compliance with the assessment fees," he said smoothly. "All rules and penalties are valid, and non-compliance will result in immediate enforcement." His words landed like stones, meant to intimidate, but the room was no longer silent. A ripple of defiance ran through the crowd. Mrs. Alvarez stood, her trembling hands now firm at her sides. "We have been silent for too long," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We've paid our dues, sacrificed our time, and trusted this community, and now you threat to destroy what we've built. We will not allow it." Maria felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with pride. The spark she had ignited months ago had grown into a flame, consuming doubt and fear, leaving resilience in its wake. The first real escalation came moments later. The board unveiled plans to initiate partial foreclosures against the most vocal residents, including the Jensens and a few single-parent households. A collective gasp rippled through the room, the air thick with shock and outrage. Maria's heart raced. This was the moment she had feared, the moment where the battle could tip into personal tragedy, yet the fear was tempered by unity. Neighbors exchanged glances, silently agreeing no one would face this alone. Voices rose in protest, a cacophony of emotion that the board had not anticipated. Parents spoke of the sleepless nights, the emotional strain, the sacrifices made to build homes, raise families, and belong to a community. Teenagers, once shy and hesitant, now spoke with clarity, telling stories of childhood memories and friendships tied to the neighborhood. Every narrative added weight to the coalition's moral authority, highlighting the human cost behind numbers and rules. Amid the chaos, Maria took a deep breath and addressed the room. "This isn't just about money," she said, her voice steady. "It's about dignity, it's about justice, it's about the principle that communities are built on respect and mutual care, not fear and intimidation. You may have the law on your side, but you do not have the hearts of this neighborhood. That we have." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a reminder that courage could be louder than bureaucracy. The board struggled to respond. Mr. Whitman's composure wavered, the polished veneer cracking under the weight of so many voices united in defiance. Questions were shouted, personal accounts shared, and for the first time the residents realized the power of their collective narrative. The room was alive with emotion, the energy nearly tangible, as if the very walls had absorbed decades of suppressed frustration and released it in one explosive moment. Then came a breakthrough. A procedural error was uncovered in the HOA's notices. Fees had been miscalculated, documents improperly filed. Legal advisors confirmed that some actions were temporarily invalid. Maria's heart leapt. It was a small victory, but in battles like this, small victories were crucial. They were proof that persistence, unity, and careful strategy could overcome even the most entrenched forces. Outside, reporters captured the scene, cameras flashing, voices recorded, capturing the emotional weight of a community standing tall. Neighbors spoke with confidence now, their fear tempered by knowledge and solidarity. The public attention added a layer of protection, a reminder that transparency could act as armor against intimidation. The HOA's authority, previously unquestioned, was suddenly vulnerable to scrutiny. Evening fell and the neighborhood slowly emptied, but the energy lingered. Families returned home, exhausted but invigorated, their sense of agency renewed. Maria walked past her children's rooms, listening to the quiet rhythm of their breathing, feeling the fragile beauty of normal life preserved in the eye of the storm. She reflected on the journey so far, the fear, the tears, the sleepless nights, the small victories, the unity forged in adversity, and she knew they were stronger than they had been at the start. That night, the coalition held a final strategy session, mapping out next steps, legal challenges, public advocacy, neighborhood communications. Every detail mattered, every voice mattered, every person mattered. The battle was far from over, but they had proven a critical truth. The power of bureaucracy could be challenged when humanity and solidarity led the charge. Maria stood at her window, gazing at the quiet streets below, the houses bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. She allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Courage wasn't absence of fear, it was acting despite fear. Resistance wasn't about defiance alone, it was about unity, strategy, and perseverance. And resilience wasn't the absence of struggle, it was the determination to endure, to rise, and to reclaim what had almost been lost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, perhaps renewed threats, perhaps tests they couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, the neighborhood had proven something remarkable. That fear, when confronted with unity and courage, could be transformed into strength. That homes were more than property, families more than names on a ledger, and people more powerful than rules designed to suppress them. Maria finally closed her eyes, exhaustion mingling with quiet triumph. They were on the cusp of victory, though the final chapter had yet to be written. And she knew, deep down, that the lessons learned, about courage, dignity, and the unbreakable bonds of community, would last far longer than any fee or foreclosure notice ever could. Why did the final confrontation feel like the culmination of every sleepless night, every anxious conversation, every ounce of courage they had summoned? Maria could feel it in her bones as she stepped into the town hall one last time, the air thick with anticipation and the faint hum of cameras capturing history. This was more than a meeting. It was a reckoning, a moment when years of fear and resilience would collide, and the truth would finally shine. The room was packed. Families, neighbors, coalition members, all present, each carrying their own weight of hope, anxiety, and quiet determination. Children sat quietly at the edges, their wide eyes reflecting the tension around them, unaware that the decisions made here could shape the neighborhood for years to come. Maria's heart raced, but a calm determination ran through her veins. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the culmination of months of strategy, unity, and relentless courage. Mr. Whitman and the HOA board entered with their usual polished confidence, but there was a subtle tension in their stride that hadn't been there before. They sensed the shift, an unspoken force of humanity and solidarity they had underestimated. "We are here to finalize matters regarding the assessment fees," Whitman began, voice measured, professional, trying to command control. "Compliance is expected immediately." Voices rose almost immediately. Families spoke with clarity and emotion, each telling their story, each detailing the sacrifices, the late nights, the struggles endured to maintain a home and a life. Mrs. Alvarez's voice, strong and unwavering, cut through the room. "These fees threat to destroy not just our homes, but the dignity and trust that built this community. We will not allow it." The room responded with applause, whispers of agreement, and nods of solidarity. Maria stepped forward, her voice carrying a resonance forged from months of preparation, fear, and hope. "You may have policies and numbers on your side," she said, her tone steady and firm. "But you do not have the heart of this community. We are families. We are neighbors. We are people who will not be silenced, intimidated, or erased. And today we reclaim what is ours, not just our homes, but our voices, our dignity, our lives." The board attempted to respond, citing legal language, policies, and procedural justifications, but the momentum had shifted. The residents were no longer passive. Their unity was palpable, a living force that filled the room. Every challenge, every legal threat, every intimidation tactic had only made them stronger, more resolute. The cameras documented not just a confrontation, but a movement, a community standing together against an authority that had underestimated them. Then came the pivotal moment. Evidence meticulously gathered by the coalition revealed procedural errors in the HOA's enforcement of fees. Notices had been miscalculated, deadlines improperly issued, and communication protocols ignored. The legal team confirmed that many actions were not just unfair, they were invalid. Gasps and murmurs of relief spread through the room. Hope surged, tempered by the lingering tension of uncertainty. Whitman's expression tightened. The polished veneer of authority cracked as murmurs grew into pointed questions, and residents presented their evidence with calm precision. Maria felt a swell of pride, not just in herself, but in every neighbor who had contributed, every voice that had stood strong, every ounce of courage that had brought them to this moment. They were no longer victims, they were authors of their own story. By the end of the meeting, a remarkable resolution had been achieved. The HOA agreed to rescind the unjust fees, acknowledge the procedural errors, and implement a transparent review process that involved residents in decision-making. It was more than a legal victory. It was a moral one. Families hugged, tears streamed, and the room vibrated with the collective relief and triumph of a community vindicated. Outside, the neighborhood streets seemed different, lighter somehow, infused with the quiet pride of having faced fear and emerged victorious. Children played in the yards, laughter filling the air in a way it hadn't for months. Maria walked past familiar homes, the glow of streetlights illuminating smiles, warm porches, and families sharing quiet moments of celebration. The bonds forged during this struggle were deeper than bricks and mortar. They were etched into hearts. That evening, Maria sat at her kitchen table, reflecting on the journey. The nights of fear, the stack of threatening letters, the hours of strategy meetings, all had led to this moment. She thought of every neighbor who had stood firm, every small act of courage that had accumulated into this victory. And she realized a profound truth. Resilience isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about confronting it together with heart and determination. She looked at her children sleeping peacefully, the fragile light of their room casting shadows on the walls. "We did it," she whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else. "We fought for what matters, and we won." There was still work ahead, discussions to ensure fairness continued and bonds to strengthen. But tonight, the neighborhood had reclaimed not just their homes, but their voices, their dignity, and their faith in each other. The moral of their story was quiet but undeniable. Courage, unity, and perseverance can overcome even the most entrenched forces. Fear may knock on doors, rules may intimidate, but when people stand together, guided by integrity and empathy, no power, no matter how seemingly absolute, can prevail. Maria had witnessed it firsthand. She had lived it, and now her neighborhood had too. As the moon rose over the quiet streets, illuminating each home with a soft, reassuring glow, Maria felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The battle was won. The lessons were learned. The community was stronger, more resilient, more connected. And she knew that no future threat, no bureaucratic decree could ever erase what they had built together. A neighborhood bound not by rules alone, but by courage, hope, and the enduring strength of human connection. Tonight she allowed herself to finally rest, the quiet hum of life around her filling her heart with warmth. They had faced fear, they had confronted power, and they had emerged victorious, not just in law, but in spirit. And in that victory, Maria realized, lay the true meaning of home. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.